That's a really interesting question. I would say the industry has been waiting for Apple to make this announcement for years. I mean, really, ever since the RCS standard matured and Google with the Jive implementation started to adopt it. Everyone has been waiting for Apple, the other major provider in the ecosystem, to start supporting RCS. I think really the surprising thing very much is the timing of it. There was very little advanced warning. I mean, there was one statement that came out and then almost immediately followed up by that official announcement. I think, the industry watchers have been anticipating this. I think particularly with the inspection that the EU was placing on a whole range of services. So, very much looking at whether iMessage was a large online platform, it felt that something would have to change, whether that was breaking open iMessage for interoperability or moving sort of iMessage environment and Apple's platform towards supporting other open standard messaging platforms like RCS. So yes, I think it's more, we could see that there were changes happening, but the exact way in which they did it, yes, very much, I think, has meant everyone has now reassessed, reevaluated, and brought out of the drawer the plans for RCS. And I would also say, this isn't just limited to Apple and RCS. We're seeing very similar things happen with WhatsApp and Messenger as well. So for Apple users, I feel the first thing is going to be that quite a better experience when they're talking with other non-Apple users. Rather than having that SMS interaction, which was frankly sort of, fire and forget a message, it's going to feel a lot more like a discussion with another iMessage user. Things like was my message read? Was it opened? Is somebody typing in reply? Those are all the comfort things that frankly make more of a conversation interaction. So I think it will be sort of the little subtle things that people will start to feel a difference. I think also group messaging, particularly in the younger segment, who are very strong adopters of creating large messaging groups. Currently, the implementation is very much that if you have an Android user in that group, everything defaults down to SMS. Whereas I think the view is that with RCS, it'll be far more like an iMessage experience. So I think there definitely will be things that end users will feel. I think other things like location sharing. We've seen how popular those are in other apps like Snap. We'll start to see those being brought into the channel as well. I think the other aspect, though, the other perspective on this is, what does it mean to Android users? I think, again, Android to Android has been RCS now, certainly for a number of months in many territories. I think it's going to start bringing up that phone-to-phone communication really defaulting to being rich media now. The preferred choice, if it's Apple to Apple, will be iMessage, and then Apple to Android will be RCS. Android to Android will of course be RCS. Android to Apple will be RCS. So really, SMS will become almost the fallback option if folks aren't in data coverage. Which with the advent and rollout of 5G plus also the 4G coverage, I think will mean more and more people will be experiencing rich messaging, frankly, as almost the default and the common way of interacting. I think though, really, what's really interesting is what does this mean for brands and the A to P messaging? So I'm really quite excited by this RCS adoption. Brands right now, they're using SMS because it's ubiquitous. We all know that you're able to reach any mobile user anywhere. So as more and more devices become RCS capable with this announcement, I think we really will see brands start to move their A to P messaging from SMS onto RCS, or other rich channels. And if we look at why they want to do that, I mean, I think the first thing is the ability to do a verified sender. And that's quite a different experience for the end user and even the brand. This means that when an end user receives a message, they'll actually get a little blue shield with a tick in that to indicate that the message did come from that source. And I think, that will be quite instrumental in giving subscribers more trust and confidence that that message is from a legitimate source in a way that SMS just cannot achieve today. In addition, there's a whole set of other enterprise branding and also just the ability to do things like read receipt modeling rather than just delivery receipt could create some interesting commercial models. Looking in a bit further in the future, I think, the ability of doing things like carousel interaction and save to wallet and some of the button functions, will certainly be used by brands. But I think that's more of a journey that folks will go on to. I can see brands, really getting quite excited, as say, by those first capabilities that are almost immediately available to them of that verified sender, that trust, and those read receipts. So I do see a number of changes actually as a result of this. Firstly, I think a lot of the person-to-person communication that has defaulted on SMS, I do think that will move on to RCS as we see the adoption and implementation of the latest iOS. So I think that change in messaging infrastructure will have implications not only for users, but also for the infrastructure behind that. So, operators who've been dimensioning their network infrastructure for SMS volumes, I think, they will see a transition to more these IP services, RCS, over the top, rather than having their own network infrastructure delivering these services. I think when we look at it from an A to P side, I think it will start to change the nature of some of the interactions. And if we look at how messages get delivered in RCS, it's very much coming from the messaging as a platform through to the end user on their handset as that encrypted IP connection there. So, again, bit of a change in the ecosystem compared to the terminating aggregator and even the inter-exchange carrier infrastructure that we have today with SMS. And as I mentioned before, this isn't just RCS it's happening on. WhatsApp and Messenger are also being opened up for interworking. So I think, we're starting to move towards an environment where users increasingly will have a common inbox for a lot of messaging services. Almost the sort of the messaging protocol itself may lose a level of visibility, and it's going to be more about the app experience that the user has. And I think, that is very interesting from a number of functions. First off, the user's perspective of trust is going to be very much around, which button, which app do they press on their handset? That will be the person that they would hold responsible if something bad appears in. That means consequently, who has the responsibility if the bad message is coming in from a different protocol rather than that closed ecosystem? I think those are some of the questions that need to be looked at. I think from a regulatory perspective, it's interesting because, we've now got a range of different services all funneling through to the end user, again, to that same inbox. Different points of control, different points of regulatory influence and control there as well. So, users again will complain to the common point that they have, those report spam buttons will become increasingly important. But then who bears the responsibility of cleaning up that traffic? I think it's an interesting question as to whether this is actually going to lead to a safer experience, keeping users free of fraud going forward. So one of the things we often hear is that when something is encrypted, people assume that makes it more secure. And it's absolutely the case. It makes it more secure from the ability to intercept in transit. But what it's not doing is enabling protection to be provided on that message whilst it's in transit. But when something's encrypted end to end, it means that nobody can deliver any value add or security or protection on that. So what that means is just because a message is encrypted from source to a user's handset doesn't necessarily mean that that source is going to be sending something good or clean. Now, let's not forget that the sort of things users are receiving right now, it's not just, links to malware. It's a lot of social engineering. So you absolutely have to trust that that origin is safe and what you're receiving and reading is valid. And I think, we will start to see quite a change in where attacks are coming from. I don't think we'll see a change in what those attacks are. We know that attackers have fine-tuned and refined social engineering and phishing scams to the point where, people fall victim. They wouldn't do it if they weren't being successful. I think, this type of end-to-end encryption potentially just changes where they will conduct those attacks from. And I think, by doing this end-to-end encryption, it changes who's got responsibility. I think it certainly means that some of the providers in the ecosystem may not have the points of control they have anymore. For example, operators with SMS firewalls, that won't have the same implication and control capability on an RCS channel where it's encrypted. I think, it puts more responsibility on the provider of the service, companies like Google, WhatsApp, Facebook, Messenger, etc. But I think, though, it's more about putting the responsibility on know your customer. Because if these things are encrypted end to end, they won't be able to necessarily protect that message in transit. They will have to ensure that that is a good source to be seen sending. And we know that there are degrees of gray in this. So I think, there's going to be a lot of thinking about how to identify and model and manage and predict in that space. And of course, there's also more emphasis going to be placed perhaps on protection on the device. And again, with devices getting richer and more capable with things like language modeling, there's certainly scope for doing device protection. We know today as well that, RCS is being used for services like grey routes. It's a perfect channel where it becomes very hard to determine, was that a consumer message or was it a message that was A to P seeking to avoid payment for an A to P message there using a P2P channel. So I think, certainly looking forward, the RCS channel and all these other changes are going to create a very interesting ecosystem for security and for protection and to keep people safe from fraud and abuse.